humans dared to enter Erran space, a forbidden region where entire civilizations vanished. The Empire thought it could conquer the unknown, but the Guardians of Erran had other plans. Ships were destroyed, fleets wiped out, and lessons of power, pride, and survival unfolded like never before. Will humanity rise smarter and stronger, or fall like those before them? Don't miss the epic journey. Subscribe now and join the adventure. The Empire had always been ambitious, always hungry for more resources, more territory, and more control. So when rumors about Erran space began circulating among the top scientists and military officers, curiosity and greed spread like wildfire. Erran space was a mysterious region far beyond the mapped sectors of the galaxy. And for centuries, it had been labeled off-limits in ancient logs, dusty records, and secreted archives. The warnings were clear. Civilizations that had ventured too far into Erran had never returned. Yet the Empire's leaders were not ones to fear legends or old stories. They saw opportunity where others saw danger. The preparations for the expedition were enormous, with the Empire mobilizing its most powerful fleet, dozens of ships bristling with weapons, shields, and technology designed to dominate. The flagship, a massive vessel called the Dominion's Pride, became the symbol of human determination and arrogance. Its hull shining with newly developed energy plating, and its corridors bustling with officers, scientists, and elite soldiers. Each crew member knew of the forbidden status of Erran space, but few understood why it had been forbidden. Many dismissed the warnings as superstition, written by fearful minds who had never reached greatness. Scientists gathered in the briefing halls, projecting star maps and ancient alien glyphs, trying to decipher the meaning of the warnings. Their translations were incomplete, vague, and unsettling, speaking of civilizations lost to their own mistakes, of power they could not control, and of a silent presence that would judge any who intruded. While some officers hesitated, feeling a strange chill, the High Command waved off the fear, insisting that the Empire's technology could overcome anything. The crew rehearsed their roles meticulously, yet whispers of doubt circulated in the narrow corridors, quietly building tension. As the fleet approached the border of Erran space, sensors began to act strangely. Signals fluctuated. Instruments showed readings that could not be explained. The stars themselves seemed different, dimmer in some areas, unnaturally bright in others, and spatial distortions made navigation tricky. The more the explorers advanced, the more uneasy they became, and some claimed to hear strange hums or pulses in the emptiness of space. It was as if the region was alive, observing every movement of the ships and waiting for the first sign of arrogance. Despite the warnings, the Empire pressed forward, driven by a mix of ambition and pride. Officers discussed strategies, weapons tests, and resource gathering plans, while scientists argued that the risks could outweigh any reward. But their voices were drowned by the roar of engines and the confidence of commanders. There was talk of colonies, mining stations, and even the possibility of discovering new life forms. Each plan seemed more daring than the last, fueled by the belief that the Empire could conquer anything, even the unknown. Night fell across the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, though in space, darkness is endless. Crew members glanced at the view screens nervously, observing shapes emerging in the distance, huge structures floating in silence, alien in design, geometrically impossible, yet eerily familiar in their symmetry. The first contact with the strange region was unsettling, a quiet that pressed on the mind, making even the most confident soldiers question their purpose. Shadows danced on the walls of the ship as lights flickered under unknown energy surges, and every step into Erran space felt like walking deeper into a trap. Yet the Empire could not retreat, not now. Not when so much pride, resources, and planning had gone into this venture. The flagship led the fleet forward, its engines cutting through the silent void, its cannons ready, and its crew on edge. Every officer knew that the forbidden zone had been forbidden for a reason, but none dared to voice the thought aloud, fearing the judgment of their superiors. Instead, they prepared for what they imagined would be a routine mission. Unaware that Erran space was not routine, and that their presence had already triggered forces beyond comprehension. With every mile into the uncharted territory, tension mounted. Rumors of previous civilizations whispered through the halls. Stories of fleets that vanished, entire planets that fell silent, and technology that had never returned from beyond the border. The Dominion's pride advanced with steady determination, carrying the weight of the Empire's ambition. Yet with every passing moment, the unease grew, a silent warning that what awaited them was not treasure, not conquest, but a challenge that no human had ever faced before. A challenge that could change the course of the Empire forever. The Empire's fleet had crossed the border into Erran space, and the moment they entered, everything felt different. The stars no longer shone as they should, scattered in odd patterns, and strange energy fields warped the readings of every sensor. Communication signals flickered and sometimes vanished completely, leaving ships isolated in a vast, silent void. The crew stared at the screens in confusion and unease, the displays showing phenomena they had never encountered. Yet the commanders insisted on moving forward, claiming the anomalies were minor and could be overcome with human technology. Their confidence seemed unshakable, but beneath the surface, tension began to creep through the fleet. Ships navigated cautiously through the strange expanse, dodging invisible distortions that bent light and gravity. The corridors of the flagship were alive with anxious whispers as officers and engineers tried to recalibrate instruments. Every calculation seemed unreliable, as if the space itself resisted their technology. Some crew members swore they saw shadows flickering outside observation ports, but when others looked, nothing was there. The silence was overwhelming, punctuated only by the low hum of engines and the occasional alert from a sensor. Yet still, the Empire pressed forward, driven by ambition and the belief that fear was weakness. As they moved deeper, enormous structures appeared, floating silently like monoliths in the emptiness. Their size was impossible to grasp, towers stretching farther than any human eye could see, surfaces glowing faintly with alien light. Strange inscriptions covered the walls, unfamiliar symbols that pulsed faintly, almost as if alive. Exploration drones were dispatched to study these structures, transmitting images back to the fleet, but even their signals were warped by the energy fields, images flickering and twisting, giving the structures a surreal, almost menacing appearance. The scientists aboard the flagship began working feverishly to interpret the inscriptions, but the language was unlike anything in human records. The characters seemed to shift when observed closely, forming new patterns that resisted understanding. Some suggested the structures were warnings, evidence of previous civilizations that had encountered this region and failed. Others dismissed the notion, claiming it was superstition, insisting that with careful study and strategy, the Empire could master whatever lay ahead. Yet the feeling of being watched grew, a subtle pressure on minds and instruments alike, as though Erran space itself was aware of their intrusion. Tensions flared among the crew as lower-ranking officers reported malfunctions in their systems that seemed inexplicable. Weapons misfired, navigation computers reset without cause, and small teams exploring the structures felt sudden chills and headaches. The High Command tried to maintain order, attributing problems to stress or human error, but the mounting incidents could no longer be ignored. The fleet moved cautiously, formation tight, but every officer could feel that they were far from in control. Every mile forward seemed to awaken the unknown, every new structure a reminder of how little humanity understood this forbidden space. One of the exploration teams reported a structure that seemed to be moving, though slowly, its position changing slightly between scans. The fleet paused to investigate, deploying reconnaissance ships to circle the anomaly. But as the probes approached, they were met with energy discharges that disabled sensors and scrambled communications. For the first time, the Empire realized that their technology might not be enough, that the rules of this space were unlike anything in their experience. The command hall of the flagship was tense, officers whispering in corridors, many glancing nervously at the glowing alien structures. The visual of the enormous structures was haunting, geometric shapes that defied logic. Some were vast rings suspended in space, others twisting towers that seemed to reach into dimensions beyond perception. The human mind struggled to comprehend their scale and design, and crew members reported strange feelings of vertigo, as if the structures exerted a psychological influence. Despite the fear, the Empire pressed forward, unwilling to retreat, convinced that bravery and skill would see them through. Yet every step deeper seemed to confirm that Erran space had its own rules, rules that humans were only beginning to understand. As hours turned into days, the silence of Erran space pressed heavily upon the fleet. Even routine tasks felt strange, the familiar rhythm of space travel replaced with unease and anticipation. Some officers dreamed of movement in the structures, of lights flashing without source, or whispers echoing in empty corridors. The boundaries between reality and imagination began to blur, fueling rumors and fear. Yet leaders insisted that their mission would continue, sending teams further into the unknown. Every observation adding pieces to a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. Every moment revealing that Erran space was alive, aware, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Exploration teams moved closer to one of the colossal alien structures, the massive form casting eerie shadows against the distant stars. Its surface was covered with inscriptions and glowing symbols, strange patterns that pulsed rhythmically as if the structure itself were alive. The scientists aboard the flagship worked tirelessly to decode the glyphs, hoping to find clues about the builders or the purpose of the structure. But the language was complex and unfamiliar, shifting subtly when observed, resisting understanding. Some researchers argued that the inscriptions were warnings, a message left by an ancient civilization, while others dismissed such notions as exaggeration fueled by fear. As drones approached the structure to scan it more closely, energy discharges suddenly erupted from its surface, striking the drones and sending them spinning into the void. Communications were disrupted, and for the first time, the crew realized that the structure was actively defending itself. Officers on the bridge stared in disbelief as entire drone fleets were destroyed before they could even transmit their findings. Panic spread among some of the lower-ranking crew members, who whispered about the ancient warnings being real. But the commanders maintained a calm facade, insisting that the Empire's fleet could handle any threat. The first human teams to land on the structure's surface experienced an immediate and terrifying sensation, a vibration that resonated not just physically, but mentally, as if the building was communicating directly with their thoughts. Lights shifted and twisted in impossible patterns. Corridors seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of reality, and a low hum filled the air, a sound that could not be traced to any mechanical source. One officer described it as a voice in the mind, warning them to leave. Yet the explorers pushed forward, driven by duty, curiosity, and the belief that human courage could overcome the unknown. Suddenly, automated defense systems activated with deadly efficiency, massive energy beams striking the human ships and soldiers with pinpoint precision. The Empire's fleet was caught off guard, unable to mount a proper defense. Chaos erupted as vessels scrambled to avoid destruction. Alarms blaring, fire spreading through ships, and communication lines severed. Officers shouted orders over the din, trying to coordinate retreats and counterattacks. But every maneuver seemed anticipated, every escape route blocked by unseen forces. The structures were not merely buildings. They were guardians. And they had awakened in response to intrusion. The scientists attempted to communicate with the structures, sending out signals and translations of the inscriptions, hoping to reason with whatever intelligence controlled them. But the responses came in forms they could not understand, flashes of light and sudden bursts of energy that disabled equipment and left crew members disoriented. The mental strain on the teams was immense, some collapsing under the weight of visions of previous civilizations, vast fleets, and entire worlds destroyed because they had ignored warnings. The fear was real, but so was determination, as the humans tried desperately to gather any information that might save them. From the flagship's bridge, commanders watched in horror as several smaller ships were obliterated within seconds, their crews lost to a force beyond comprehension. The initial pride and confidence of the Empire began to crumble, replaced with the stark realization that they had underestimated the dangers of Erran space. Even the most hardened officers felt the psychological weight of the structure's presence, the silent authority they exuded, and the unmistakable message that human arrogance had consequences. The warnings in ancient records were no myth. They were prophecy, and the Empire had ignored them. Attempts to attack the structures with conventional weapons proved useless. Energy blasts dissipated harmlessly, or were redirected back at the attackers. Shields flared and failed under the overwhelming force, and the fleet's cohesion began to break down as panic and confusion spread. Orders were given to regroup, but even formation flights were disrupted by invisible forces. The realization dawned that air and space was not passive territory. It was actively defended, designed to punish any who entered without respect or understanding. The structures themselves seemed aware, observing, analyzing, and responding to every move the humans made. Some of the crew began reporting strange visions during encounters with the structures, images of entire fleets consumed by fire, cities collapsing, and civilizations vanishing, memories of the past, or perhaps warnings from the present, flickering across their minds. The psychological toll was as devastating as the physical threat, pushing humans to the edge of panic and desperation. Despite this, the command continued to press forward, seeking control, seeking answers, believing that courage and strategy could overcome the unknown. Yet every passing moment reinforced a terrifying truth. Erran space was alive, intelligent, and unwilling to tolerate intruders. The Empire had entered a realm far beyond its understanding, and the cost of ignorance was about to become painfully clear. The Empire's fleet regrouped after the first devastating attack, the flagship's hull scorched, smaller ships drifting damaged through the silent void. Officers barked orders, trying to restore control, but panic simmered beneath the surface. Sensors were unreliable, weapons misfired, and communication lines sputtered. Yet the commanders refused to retreat. Their pride and ambition burned hotter than fear. They believed that with overwhelming firepower, they could destroy the alien structures, claim air and space, and prove human dominance. The fleet formed a tight formation, energy weapons charged, engines pulsing with force, ready to strike, every crew member bracing for the next confrontation. As they approached the structures again, their size and complexity became even more apparent. Towers twisted in impossible angles, massive rings floated like silent sentinels, and alien lights pulsed rhythmically, almost as if breathing. The exploration teams tried to analyze weak points, searching for vulnerabilities in the alien defenses. Engineers worked feverishly, running calculations and simulations, hoping that human ingenuity could find a way to break through. The scientists warned repeatedly that the structures might be sentient, capable of responding to attacks intelligently, but the High Command dismissed the concern as speculation, believing sheer force would be enough. The Empire's first volleys of energy fire struck the nearest structure, massive beams tearing through the void, but the attacks seemed to have no effect. The beams deflected, absorbed, or redirected, striking nothing and leaving the ships vulnerable. Some vessels were hit by the reflected energy, shields failing, fires breaking out, and crews struggling to survive. Confusion spread among the fleet, the commanders shouting over alarms, trying to adjust tactics. But every action seemed anticipated, every strategy countered by unseen forces. The humans realized, slowly and terrifyingly, that brute force was useless, that pride alone could not conquer Erran. Inside the flagship, tension was at its peak, officers pacing the bridge, faces pale under the flashing lights. They watched as drones and fighter squads were obliterated almost instantly, their sophisticated weapon systems rendered useless. Some soldiers whispered about the possibility that the structures themselves were alive, aware of every movement, capable of learning and reacting. Others refused to believe it, clinging to the hope that there must be a weakness somewhere, a flaw in the alien defenses. The debate raged as fires burned through the hull of damaged ships and the fleet struggled to maintain formation. Meanwhile, smaller human teams continued to explore the structure's surfaces, dodging automated energy strikes and trying to gather data. Every step was dangerous, every corridor a potential trap. The hum of alien energy was deafening, vibrating through the metal floors, rattling the nerves of the explorers. Some reported hearing whispers or seeing fleeting images of destroyed civilizations, visions that seemed to warn them of consequences if they continued. Fear and determination battled inside each crew member. The leaders pressed forward, insisting that bravery meant pushing through even in the face of the unknown. The Empire attempted coordinated attacks, combining the fleet's firepower, using flanking maneuvers and synchronized strikes, but the structures countered each effort with deadly precision. Energy shields flared, beams struck vessels before they could even complete their movements, and entire attack squads were vaporized in seconds. The more the humans tried to assert control, the more apparent it became that Erran space was not a battlefield to be won. It was a living defense system, adaptive, intelligent, and unforgiving. The pride of the Empire began to crack under the pressure, yet officers could not bring themselves to admit defeat. In the chaos, crew members began to question the wisdom of their mission. Whispered doubts spread through the corridors, some suggesting retreat, while others argued that withdrawal would dishonor the Empire. The scientists pleaded for caution, warning that continued aggression could provoke complete annihilation. But the High Command remained stubborn, convinced that fear was weakness and that perseverance would bring victory. The battle was becoming a test not of skill alone, but of arrogance versus humility, of human pride against forces far beyond their understanding. As hours passed, casualties mounted, hulls burned, systems failed, and morale fell. Yet the Empire's leaders still insisted on pressing the attack, their desire to conquer and claim Erran space blinding them to the reality around them. Every destroyed ship, every lost crew member was a stark reminder that the humans were not in control. The structures stood unscathed, silent yet menacing, watching, waiting, teaching a lesson in power and consequence. The fleet realized in whispers and fearful glances that they were not facing a simple obstacle. They were confronting an intelligence far older and more capable than any human mind could fully grasp. Despite the devastation, the Empire's pride would not allow them to retreat. And yet, deep inside the minds of many crew members, fear had already taken root. The realization was spreading slowly. The Forbidden Zone had been forbidden for a reason, and the cost of ignoring those warnings was higher than anyone had imagined. Erran space revealed its true guardians, enormous beings of energy, shimmering with colors that shifted and danced like fire across the void. Their presence was overwhelming, filling the minds of every crew member with awe and fear. The fleet watched in silence as the beings moved effortlessly, their forms constantly changing, flowing like liquid light yet solid enough to deflect attacks. No human weapon could even scratch them. Energy blasts dissolved harmlessly against their radiant bodies, and shields failed instantly. The realization hit hard. These were not structures or machines. They were living, intelligent entities, capable of controlling everything within Erran space. The Guardians communicated in ways humans had never experienced. Not through words, but through impressions directly in the mind. Images, feelings, and visions flashed into the consciousness of the crew, overwhelming some, terrifying others. The humans saw glimpses of civilizations destroyed, entire fleets incinerated, and worlds abandoned because their inhabitants had been arrogant and reckless. The beings projected the consequences of ignoring warnings, showing the Empire the price of greed and pride. The visions were vivid, almost tangible, each one a warning, and every officer knew instinctively that combat would be meaningless against such power. Chaos erupted across the fleet as some ships attempted to fire, only to have their weapons ripped apart by unseen forces. Smaller vessels disintegrating instantly, the crews consumed by blasts of radiant energy. Panic spread, but discipline among the officers and scientists helped prevent total collapse. Some lower-ranking crew members fainted under the mental strain, unable to process the overwhelming impressions from the Guardians. While fear gripped the fleet, a few scientists and explorers tried to interpret the beings' messages, hoping to find a way to communicate or appeal to their judgment. Their understanding was minimal, but the images of past mistakes and destroyed empires were clear enough to convince even the most skeptical that retreat and diplomacy were the only options. The Guardians displayed their intelligence further, manipulating the environment, bending light and energy to create illusions, hiding their movements, and striking with precision. Every attempt by the humans to regroup or retaliate was met with an invisible wall, unseen energy pulses that disrupted navigation and disabled systems. The Empire's pride suffered a heavy blow, realizing that no tactic, no strategy, no weapon could overcome Erran's defenses. Even the bravest soldiers began to understand that the ancient warnings had not been mere superstition. They had been lessons, carved into history to prevent precisely this disaster. Amid the devastation, A few of the fleet's scientists and officers began trying a different approach, sending signals of peace, lowering shields, ceasing fire, and attempting to project intentions of respect rather than aggression. The Guardians responded by intensifying their mental impressions, showing what humanity could achieve if it learned restraint and wisdom. Some humans felt an almost spiritual connection, as if the Guardians were testing them, gauging whether arrogance would lead to annihilation or if understanding could survive. Those who attempted communication were rewarded with clearer visions, insights into Erran's power, and subtle guidance on how to survive the encounter. The High Command resisted the idea of submission, struggling to accept that humility might be the only way to survive. Orders to continue fighting were overruled by desperate scientists, who emphasized that survival depended on listening, learning, and respecting the rules of this strange domain. Crew members worked frantically to repair systems, stabilize ships, and relay the mental impressions into tangible warnings for the rest of the fleet. Time slowed as the humans realized that the Guardians were not simply defensive. They were instructive, enforcing a harsh but fair lesson, showing that strength without wisdom was meaningless. The Guardians' influence extended to every corner of the fleet, immobilizing aggressive maneuvers, blocking attacks, and subtly guiding those willing to listen. The humans began to understand the magnitude of what they had stumbled into and the scale of civilizations lost to the same hubris. Some whispered in awe that these beings were like gods, yet their purpose was not domination, it was protection, teaching respect for the power of the universe. The Empire's arrogance was laid bare, every misstep punished, yet there was hope for those willing to learn and change. As the day in Erran space wore on, the fleet's perspective shifted, the crew realizing that the Guardians were not enemies in the traditional sense, but judges of intent, capable of extraordinary destruction, but also of imparting knowledge. The humans had entered a realm that demanded humility, intelligence, and cooperation. And any attempt to conquer it by force alone would result in total annihilation. By the time the fleet stabilized, it was clear that the Empire had underestimated the challenge, and the lesson of the Guardians was seared into the minds of all who survived. Strength without wisdom comes at the ultimate price. Some of the surviving crew members realized that fighting was useless and tried a different approach, attempting to communicate not with weapons, but with respect and careful observation. The scientists and lower-ranking officers took the lead, sending signals designed to show that the humans came in ignorance, not in malice. They projected thoughts of curiosity, caution, and willingness to learn. Hoping the Guardians would understand that they posed no threat, some crew members felt the Guardians respond, not with violence, but with intense visions and impressions, showing the results of arrogance, greed, and reckless conquest. The images were overwhelming, flashing across the minds of everyone on board. Vast fleets consumed in flames, civilizations wiped out, planets left barren, and societies destroyed because they ignored the warnings of the past. Despite the efforts to communicate, the High Command refused to surrender, believing that asking for mercy was weakness. They continued to give orders to move forward, to study the structures aggressively, and to maintain their presence, arguing that retreat would be dishonorable and make the Empire look weak. Yet, every act of defiance provoked more powerful responses from the Guardians, energy pulses, striking ships, shields failing, systems shutting down, and smaller vessels being obliterated within moments. The humans realized that their old strategies of intimidation and firepower were meaningless here, that Erran's space was alive, intelligent, and capable of responding to intention rather than strength. Within the fleet, tension escalated sharply, whispers of fear and doubt spreading through corridors. Some officers begged their superiors to reconsider, to accept the messages, to acknowledge that the Guardians demanded respect, while others clung to pride, arguing that survival without honor was pointless. The mental strain on the crew grew unbearable, as every attempt to act with confidence was met by overwhelming force, and every vision from the Guardians carried the weight of civilizations that had fallen before. It was no longer a matter of skill or tactics. The humans were learning that humility, understanding, and intelligence were their only chance of survival. The Guardians intensified their demonstrations of power, showing how the Empire's aggression could lead to total annihilation. Massive energy waves passed through the fleet, disabling engines, disrupting communications, and creating spatial distortions. Ships drifted helplessly, forced to experience the Guardians' lessons firsthand, while visions continued to play in the minds of those on board, highlighting hubris and arrogance as the root of past failures. The surviving humans began to act cautiously, coordinating with each other, not as conquerors, but as learners, trying to observe and respond in ways that might show the Guardians they understood their place in Erran space. A few brave scientists attempted more direct contact, projecting patterns of understanding and respect, signaling a willingness to learn from the Guardians rather than dominate. The mental impressions from the beings shifted subtly in response, almost as if acknowledging that some humans were finally listening. A strange calm descended over parts of the fleet, though the threat was still very real. Energy pulses no longer destroyed ships instantly when respect and caution were shown, and the humans began to realize that the Guardians' actions were not purely destructive. They were corrective, enforcing rules and teaching lessons, rather than seeking revenge. The High Command continued to struggle with the reality of the situation, the pride that had carried the Empire into Erran space, now clashing with the overwhelming evidence that survival required humility. Some officers reluctantly allowed retreat, others maintained aggressive postures, creating tension within the fleet. The contrast was stark. Those who listened, learned, and adapted were surviving, while those clinging to arrogance faced immediate danger. The experience taught the humans that intelligence, diplomacy, and understanding were far more powerful than raw force, and that every action had consequences far beyond what they could control. As the humans continued to navigate Erran space, communication became more focused on careful observation, respect, and learning, rather than aggression. The Guardians continued to test them, showing the history of past civilizations and the results of reckless behavior. Each impression was a warning, but also a guide, offering humanity the chance to survive where others had failed. Crew members began to appreciate the subtle intelligence of the Guardians, the way they judged intent and responded to actions. The lesson became clear. Erran space was not a territory to conquer, but a domain to understand and respect, and only those who embraced this truth would survive. By the end of this period, the humans had learned an important principle, one that would shape the remainder of their encounter. Strength alone would bring destruction, but intelligence, caution, and humility could earn them a chance to live. The survivors realized that the Guardians were not enemies, but teachers, enforcing rules that civilizations had ignored for millennia. And as the fleet continued its careful navigation, they understood that the ultimate survival in Erran space required surrendering arrogance, listening to the lessons presented, and accepting that some forces in the galaxy were far greater than any empire. The Empire's fleet had suffered unimaginable losses, the once proud ships now scattered and damaged, the survivors clinging desperately to life. Hulls smoked from energy strikes, engines sputtered, and communication systems were barely functional. Every officer and crew member felt the weight of failure pressing down. The Guardians of Erran space had shown no mercy to arrogance, their power absolute and precise. Entire squadrons had been obliterated. The crews vaporized in seconds, leaving the remaining humans shaken and terrified. The scale of the devastation was hard to comprehend, entire fleets gone in moments, and those who survived could only watch in disbelief as the power of Erran space was revealed. The flagship, Dominion's Pride, floated among the wreckage, its crew battered, exhausted, and fearful. Officers worked frantically to maintain what little control remained, coordinating with scattered ships to avoid further destruction. Yet every maneuver had to be cautious, as any sign of aggression could trigger another devastating response. Some crew members whispered of miracles as ships dodged pulses of energy that seemed almost guided, as if the Guardians were testing the humans, deciding who was worthy of survival. Meanwhile, the survivors began to realize that the Empire's pride and arrogance had led directly to their near destruction, and that ignoring the warnings had cost them dearly. The few remaining commanders struggled to regain order, issuing retreat commands while still trying to maintain authority. The tension between obedience and panic ran high, As crew members grappled with the enormity of the losses, some refused to believe the Empire had been humbled so completely. Clinging to the notion that technology and strategy could still save them, others accepted the truth. Erran space was beyond any human attempt at control, and survival depended on humility, intelligence, and cooperation. Messages were sent back to distant sectors, fragmented and chaotic, warning other factions not to attempt what the Empire had done. The surviving humans carried the full story of devastation, warning that Erran space was not a place to conquer, but a domain to respect. The Guardians maintained their presence, hovering near the damaged fleet, their radiant energy forms illuminating the void. They offered no further attacks, as if recognizing that the lesson had been learned. Yet the humans knew that one wrong move could trigger destruction again. Every remaining officer and crew member understood that Erran space judged not just action, but intent, and that any hint of aggression could result in annihilation. Slowly, the fleet began to regroup, engineers repairing vital systems, scientists studying the Guardians' responses, trying to understand the principles that had saved the few remaining ships. The survivors told of the visions they had received, images of civilizations destroyed, fleets obliterated, and worlds left in ruins. They shared accounts of how the Guardians had communicated, projecting lessons directly into their minds, forcing them to confront the arrogance and recklessness that had caused previous empires to fail. It became clear that Erran space was not simply a region of danger, but a living record, preserving the consequences of mistakes and teaching future intruders to respect the boundaries it had set. The humans who had entered learned that intelligence and humility were more powerful than firepower, and that survival required listening and adapting, not attacking. As the fleet limped toward the edge of Erran space, survivors reflected on the magnitude of the Empire's failure. The leaders who had once believed in conquest now faced the painful truth. Greed and pride had led to the near destruction of their forces, and the cost was beyond calculation. Even the strongest officers were humbled, realizing that the Guardians had not just defended their territory, but enforced a principle older and more powerful than any fleet. The surviving crew understood that humanity had narrowly avoided complete annihilation. Thanks to their willingness, some had been forced to learn, adapt, and show respect, rather than rely on raw force. Messages sent to the rest of the Empire were filled with warnings and tales of caution, recounting the power of Erran's Guardians and the fate of those who ignored the ancient rules. The story spread rapidly, a sobering reminder that arrogance could lead to extinction, and that intelligence, adaptability, and humility were essential tools in exploring the unknown. As the surviving ships left the Forbidden Region, the Guardians' glowing forms receded into the distance, a final warning lingering in the minds of every human aboard, that Erran space was alive, intelligent, and unforgiving to those who approached with pride. The few who survived carried with them the full weight of the Empire's failures, their memories scarred by the destruction they had witnessed. Yet in those survivors also grew a sense of hope, an understanding that humanity could learn from its mistakes, adapt, and survive where others had fallen. They knew that the ultimate price had been paid, but the lessons were clear, and the story of the Empire's near annihilation would be remembered across generations, serving as a warning to all who might one day encounter the mysterious and powerful Guardians of Erran space. Amid the wreckage of the Empire's fleet, humans from a nearby observation point watched silently, carefully hidden, studying Erran space and the Guardians without revealing themselves. They observed every movement, every pulse of energy, every reaction to the Empire's aggression, and slowly, a plan began to form. Unlike the Empire, these humans were cautious, intelligent, and patient, learning not through arrogance, but through observation and careful analysis. They understood that Erran space was alive, that the Guardians were aware, intelligent, and capable of immense destruction, and that survival depended on respect, adaptability, and wisdom. The observers noted the lessons the Guardians had enforced on the Empire, seeing firsthand the consequences of pride and recklessness. Entire fleets had been destroyed, civilizations erased from memory, and the humans realized that raw power alone was meaningless in Erran space. Intelligence, strategy, and humility were far more valuable. They began mapping the structures and energy fields from a safe distance, recording every anomaly and every response from the Guardians, piecing together the principles that governed this mysterious region. Every detail was carefully documented, ensuring that future explorers could navigate Erran space without repeating the Empire's catastrophic mistakes. Communication among the human observers was cautious and precise, sharing insights, testing hypotheses, and simulating responses. They avoided any display of aggression, maintaining low energy signatures, and projecting intentions of study rather than conquest. Unlike the Empire, they understood that the Guardians responded not to weapons, but to intent. Every signal, every movement, and every impression was carefully considered to ensure that they were seen as learners rather than intruders. Through careful patience, they began to gain small insights into the Guardians' behavior, noticing patterns in how energy pulses were directed, how visions were projected, and how their presence was acknowledged without hostility. The humans also began experimenting with subtle communication, sending mental signals of curiosity and respect, mirroring the way the Guardians had communicated with the Empire. Slowly, the Guardians' attention shifted, no longer targeting them with destructive force, but observing and testing their responses. Each experiment was a lesson, revealing that the Guardians valued intelligence, adaptability, and restraint. The observers realized that they had an opportunity the Empire had never had, to learn from the Guardians without provoking total annihilation, to gain knowledge that could change humanity's approach to exploration and conflict. Over time, the humans began to decode some of the inscriptions on the structures, understanding fragments of the ancient language. They discovered the stories of civilizations that had been destroyed for arrogance, the warnings left for future explorers, and the subtle guidance embedded in the glyphs for those willing to listen. Knowledge that had been lost to the Empire now became available to these careful observers. The Guardians, it seemed, recognized their intelligence and restraint, allowing them to approach closer than anyone had before, revealing the immense scale and complexity of Erran space without punishment. The humans recorded everything meticulously, understanding that this knowledge could be humanity's greatest advantage. Unlike the Empire, they approached Erran space not as conquerors, but as learners, adapting their technology and strategy to the unique environment, preparing for future encounters. The Guardians' lessons had been harsh for the Empire, but for these observers, they were invaluable, teaching that survival depended on patience, understanding, and respect rather than raw aggression. Every action was measured, every decision guided by what had been learned from the Empire's failures. As they prepared to leave Erran space, the observers reflected on what they had gained, understanding that humanity had narrowly avoided repeating the Empire's mistakes. They had learned the principles that governed this powerful and mysterious region: intelligence over force, observation over aggression, humility over pride. The Guardians receded into the void, their glowing forms a final reminder that Erran space was alive, vigilant, and unforgiving, yet also a source of wisdom for those who approached correctly. The humans left with unprecedented knowledge, their mission successful not because of weapons or strength, but because of thought, caution, and understanding. Back in their own system, the observers shared their findings with the rest of humanity, ensuring that the lessons of Erran space would shape future explorers. Strategies were developed based on intelligence and respect, equipment designed to interact with the environment rather than dominate it, and every human involved understood the immense responsibility that came with knowledge. The Empire's failure became a warning, and humanity's careful observation became a triumph, showing that the galaxy could be faced successfully when wisdom guided action. In the end, humanity had survived where others had fallen, not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and adaptability. They carried the knowledge of Erran space, ready to face future dangers with understanding, and proving that true power lay not in destruction, but in learning, observation, and respect for forces far greater than themselves. The story ended with hope and promise, a reminder that the galaxy could be explored safely if humans applied wisdom, and that the ultimate victories were won through intellect, courage, and humility.